Time for another edition of Family Matters here on Erie News Now Sunrise, where we talk about some of the issues that families are facing these days. And to help us do that, we bring in communication and relationship specialists, Pamela Pressler and Melissa Solkowski. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Last week we were talking about trust and learning how to trust yourself and setting boundaries as well. I want to continue that discussion this morning, if we could, about those boundaries. And I want to start off by kind of defining for the audience, ladies, what those boundaries that we're talking about are, and maybe, again, what they aren't as well.
Sure. We do meet with a lot of people and we talk about boundaries quite a bit. That's probably a word used in our office on a daily basis. And a lot of times we see that people are confused about what boundaries really are or what they're not. And so we wanted to spend some time today just speaking to what they are, what they're not, and creating some clarity around that for people, just in terms of relationships and how that shows up. So Pam's going to kind of take us into that.
So I think really, Mark, when Melissa and I talk about boundaries with other people, what we find is that they get boundaries confused with ultimatums. Boundaries aren't lines in the sand and kind of telling people what to do. Healthy boundaries it's about keeping us healthy, not managing somebody else's behavior. And so I think what happens is that we often find that whether or not we know what a boundary is, how to set boundaries, how to maintain boundaries, whether we're comfortable with that, originates from what was modeled to us in our families of origin. So we often use the term, we don't know what we don't know. So if boundaries weren't modeled for us, it's really hard to set them. And it gets confusing and blurs over with feelings of, I love a person and things should be wonderful and I have all these expectations and no limits in a relationship. So we try to coach people on really being able to be, that boundaries are about being healthy in ourselves and that they're purely intended. We're not doing it to try to manage somebody else's behavior. We're setting boundaries because it's what makes us feel good and makes us feel safe and secure in a relationship. So the purpose of boundaries is really to create closeness, unlike an ultimatum, because we're trying to create closeness. It helps us feel less distant in our relationship. And I think sometimes that gets really confused and just really is the essence of having a healthy relationship.
So if you think of it, to kind of simplify it for a takeaway for people, is really it's about protecting what we value and valuing ourselves. And like we talked about last week or the week before that, trusting yourself and what you need and being able to articulate that. It's really becomes more about our need and protecting that as opposed to anyone else in the equation. So they're not personal. It's really just anyone in front of us. It's really a way for us to function in the healthiest way possible and show up as our best self relationally.
Pamela Pressler and Melissa Solkowski talking about what those boundaries are, what they aren't. We thank you so much for the helpful information that you provide for us each and every week. And we'll see you back here, of course, next week for another edition of Family Matters.